So yes, I'm Łukasz Górnicki. I'm based really close to Kraków. It's actually not very close because there's a long highway, which is called highway, which is not really highway, but they get a lot of money from us to drive it. So I don't use it very often, but Dąbrowa Górnicza is not far. We have really nice lakes. You should come over during the weekend if you're staying longer. So that's about my city, where I live. I work in SAP Hybris. I joined it 6 years ago as a technical writer. That was something new for me. Previously, I was knowledge manager, and I was also working in a courthouse, typing what people are saying during the trials, which was super interesting, by the way. You should try it. And then during my work as a technical writer, I noticed that I'm not so much interested in writing like single documents. I was more interested into the architecture of how the content is structured. So I moved into the role of documentation architect. And then 3 years ago, we totally changed approach of writing documentation. We found out that we should have a new product in our company. So 3 years ago, our company started doing something except of the stuff that we are already selling. We made a lot of changes in the organization. And the new tool that we started working on, the new software, is called IaaS. It's cloud stuff. It's all about microservices. So all my last 3 years, and what I'm going to talk to you today about, is about my experience. What happened over those 3 years, and why we're really good in documenting microservices, what we had to do. Not only from the technical point of view, because I talked about it 2 years ago at SOAP, but also from the organizational point of view. And important, if you're not into microservices and it's not your part at all, just forget about microservices term. The change can be done anywhere, in any organization. You remember the talk from Mateusz, Justyna, and Basia in the morning? They're actually working in my company as well, and they are not doing microservices, but they also made a huge organizational change as well, similar to ours, actually the same that we did. So microservices, let me just quickly introduce, because it drove our changes, so I want to quickly introduce what it is. It's not boring architecture, so that's actually microservices. You know what it is? You're watching National Geographic or Finding Nemo, the cartoon. Yeah. So that's actually the microservices. So it's like one thing. It's moving in one way. It's communicating in one way. It's synchronized, but it's like every single fish can be kind of removed, replaced with the other one. Inside, it's totally different animal, but from the outside, it has one unique interface where it communicates one defined way, it works together. So comparing to Monolith Architecture, I found this picture on the net and I was really surprised that something like this was produced some time ago. But anyway, that's a monolith, so something opposite to microservices. The old approach for writing software, where you're building everything in, let's say you build one huge software, then you pack it or put it on CD and send to some company so they can put it on their servers. So we knew that it's working, we're selling it, but we didn't want to do everything in one place. We wanted to move into microservices. So you can rather compare, you remember Finding Nemo, so it's like comparing shark to those little fishes. Like you can replace one small fish and it still works. And that's one unique super shark that cannot be replaced really. So 3 more main points about architecture. You have to build everything from scratch. If you want to move in your company, you're moving from monolith to microservices. You're building everything from scratch, the whole functionality. There's no way really to take your monolith and put it into microservice, which means that if you're changing everything, the whole approach to write software, all the tools that you used till now, that's a moment for you as a technical writer to jump in and say, okay, if you're changing everything, let's change the way we're working with documentation as well. That's the perfect moment. We're building everything from scratch. That's why not to build documentation from scratch as well with tooling around it and processes around it. Microservices and APIs, that's for cloud. So the coolest stuff you can work on. What's more to talk about it? And the most common interface for those is REST API. So that's another cool stuff about microservices and why developers, for example, love it, because they can choose whatever programming language they want. They write those microservices in different languages, but at the end, they just need to make sure that the interface they're having is the one unique, in this case, REST API. And this shift from monolith to microservice, it's a huge challenge for developers. They really have to change their mind a lot. Their processes, their release cycles, everything is changing. And because they have a lot of challenges, the same challenges become your challenges as well. So first of all, these microservices are super small, which means you can have a lot of them. And they are totally independent if they are obviously written in the right way. But at the end, you have to document them in one place. So you can imagine that at some point of time, you have like hundreds. At the moment, we actually have, for our product, we have 160 different APIs. But at the end, even though there are exactly 160 different software pieces, at the end they have to be documented in one place. What we noticed with microservices, that you can really write them quickly. And you can build new functionalities much faster than with the monolith. So we noticed that, we knew that teams will join us really quickly, new teams, and they will write new APIs based on our foundation. So we had this challenge that we're going to have to expand really quickly. We're going to have to scale the organization. And we knew that with current approach, we won't manage to do it. And that's a super popular term now, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. That's affecting documentation as well. So you can imagine developers, they can quickly write some API. They can quickly review it. They can quickly test it. They can quickly release it a few times a day even. And then you can imagine like, okay, so what about my documentation? If they're releasing features every day, I have to have a tooling that allows me to do the same with my content. Release whenever I want. So that's something for you. You should become a technical writer for microservices, for APIs. And that's one of the main reasons why you should do it. That's the main principle behind this whole architecture that we're implementing in our company, and we are changing our culture towards this approach is you build it, you run it, which basically means eat your own dog food. So it's not like with the monolith. I remember times from this monolith that there was a developer developing something, and then we were like in the same building, we have people that implement our software and develop our software. And then we were going to some parties like summer party or winter party, or however you call it. And then those people meet, and you can hear they're arguing like, what did you develop? What is it? I have to maintain it. It sucks. I told you so many times you should improve it because on production it won't scale, blah, 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 blah. And with microservices, it's not a problem because whatever you develop, you deploy it, and you have to support it. So even me in my team, I'm still on a DevOps role, and we support our services that we release 24/7. We're being waken up in the night because something went down, and it's cool. I mean, it's not cool to be waken up in the night, but it's really driving us to make sure that whatever we release is really not going to wake us up later again. So you want to become a writer for microservices because of this principle. Because with this principle, it means that developers, they have some different staging environments, unboxing, and all that stuff where they can hit their microservices with tons of different tests, integration tests, to make sure that before it goes to production, it's not going to fail. And you probably very often had to download some software that your developers are working on, set up the environment to try it out. In microservices world, you don't have to do it because you reuse the development environment that they already have set it up. And you really become a technical writer. We choose to work with Markdown and Git, and kind of forced our writers to use Git directly. And we noticed that they are integrating really quickly with the teams, and they're kind of starting experimenting with much more than just writing. They're more into coding, into playing with stuff, and they're kind of start talking develop-ish, if we can say it. And however it really is like this. So because we have this culture that we have this product supported 24/7, and we want to avoid failures as much as we can. We have this rule that not only technical writers, but also developers have to follow the feedback from the customer. So we have a tooling in place, whatever you set up is going to work as well, where we gather feedback. And because of the tools around we have that we can really quickly deploy whatever we want, software or documentation, we can really continuously, quickly, every day, fix stuff, quickly improve, get feedback, and then fix again. Yeah, and now you have all challenges. Now you can for a second imagine your organization, how you would handle it. 3 years ago, I remember, again, the talk from the morning about Confluence. So there was an idea for a second in my company that we should still use Confluence for that. But it was a really short idea. And you're lucky, kind of, because 3 years ago when we started working on it, nobody was, even developers didn't really knew what microservices are. They were just obviously going to some conferences and hearing about all these principles, rules, but they didn't really know what that is in action. And from the technical writer point of view, we had exactly the same situation. We didn't know how to deal with it. But now you have two solutions. The technical one is super easy, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. So you just have to make sure that whatever you're writing, it's a part of the whole development cycle. So you must make sure that your solution for writing is fully integrated with developer cycles. They can write content. For us, 80% of the content is produced by developers at the moment. So you need to be prepared to support it. And then the organizational change. You have to get rid of your documentation team. But however it sounds and whatever feelings it might bring. So I was in the documentation team when I started at Hybris, and I was in the team when that happened. And it looked like this, that, maybe not real panda, but, and that's at the end how we felt. So we didn't have a chance to listen about it during conference. There was just management coming over saying, okay, let's turn everything around, upside down. Let's try something else. Later on, you can Google about scaling agile. At some point of view, every organization goes to the point where they say, okay, agile is not enough, we have to scale agile. So you can read about Spotify, how they scaled agile with tribes and all that fancy buzzword. So our company was also looking at this different way of handling organization. What's really important, and what I hope you can get from what I'm saying, is at the beginning, you can only say it's a stupid idea. 3 years ago, I was one of the loudest persons in the department saying, like, what the hell are you trying to do? Like, we're gonna be desynchronized. We're not gonna know what the other technical writer from the other team is doing. That's just gonna suck even more than it sucks already. But it really, really works. And how we solved this organizational change after drinking a lot and saying goodbye to friends from the documentation team. At the moment, we have developers team. We don't have QA team, documentation team. There's just a Scrum team with developers. If they need a QA because they have a service that is not easy to test and they need a good QA tester, they will hire a QA tester. If they feel comfortable with writing API documentation on their own, they're going to do it on their own. If they don't feel comfortable with it, they will get a technical writer. And there are still teams, still dev teams that I know that decided to still work without technical writer. We gathered a community of practice. How many of you heard about this community of practice term? Okay. So now the buzzword on conferences is, and not in only content conferences, any actually conference, any management stuff, is to talk about silos, don't do silos, build bridges. So you can, and 2 weeks ago on the other conference, there was a Rahel, not sure if she's on the stage, somewhere in the audience. She was doing a talk about silos and bridges, and she made a really good point about saying that Agile, yeah, it might be against silos, but at the end, every Scrum team is kind of micro silos, because you're really, really detached from the other Scrum teams. So this community of practice is kind of builds bridges between all those teams. It makes, you don't have to have one documentation team manager to keep people together. We're a community that doesn't need steering. We know that we want to do stuff good. We know that if I'm going to write my content well, but then the rest sucks from other teams, nobody will appreciate my job because they will judge me basing on everything that is around. So we are a really strong community. We don't need steering. We are gathering on our own and we're exchanging thoughts on our own. And that's what just we did without documentation team. Then some members of the old documentation team, they moved into a Scrum team. That was focused, they didn't want to write, they didn't want to stay with some documentation, some Scrum team. They wanted to focus on mentoring the developers, on setting guidelines, on doing language review. So we kind of set it up a team which now is called Q team. By the way, how many of you are in the Scrum team? How many of you that are in the Scrum team have a custom name for your Scrum team? Okay, good. That's a very good stuff. So the next team is called Wookiees. That's my team. At the beginning, when we were setting up the team, it was only documentation people. So it was me and the other writer that we started kind of being sucked into this dark side of developers. We started being more techie, learning developish. So we said, okay, we're going to go into this team and work on the tooling, on the new tooling for writing documentation. And now it evolved. My team, we have developers. We also have a technical writer. That's the team. Obviously, connection, hairs. That's why we're so hairy. There's also Gosia, there back. She's also Wookiee and she's also hairy. Sorry, Gosia. I was thinking why it worked. So we said, like, without organization, without structure, it's going to fail. But it didn't. Obviously, it's not perfect. There's no perfect organization and tools and everything, but it works. And it works really well when I recall the times from the old documentation team. And my personal opinion is that it's somehow connected to this psychological change, how you phrase stuff, how you approach things. So how many of you had some trainings where they told you don't call stuff bugs, call them defects? Only one person. So when I heard it for the first time, I was like, no way, what's the difference? It's like bugs, defects, it's the same stuff at the end, right? Or whenever we have retrospective, our Scrum Master also always tries to do some things better, and he's like saying, no, don't say what's wrong, say what we can do better, so we're going to have better relationship. And I think that what happened with this change, there's no documentation team, and developers starting liking this change. The developers and writers, maybe not that close, but they really, or maybe I don't know everything, but at the end, really what I noticed, that it was enough for developer to notice that the tech writer is his team. He has the same manager. He has the same goals. He's trying to understand what I'm doing. And whatever we talk and however we mock developers, and I think we have some developers, right? So I'm not going to do any developer jokes, but and I'm actually going to say one good thing about you. You probably have more, but okay, let's stop it. One thing that is really good with developers, what I always like, is that whenever they have a goal, they have a target, they have something to do, they will go for it. They will support others, they expect support, they expect understanding. And that's what we lacked when we had this documentation team, and we were like shared resources in 3 different Scrum teams. And now when they see that, this writer is attending all the meetings, is listening, it's kind of talking developers because of the technology that we choose, and they have to learn all these tools. They really started treating writers in more civilized way. And my personal favorite quotes from the past. So before I really often heard this simple excuse like, we need documentation, yeah, we have this documentation team, right? So let's just call them, they're gonna give somebody and we're gonna solve everything. We don't have to think about it. The product owner doesn't have to think about it. Documentation team, that's their duty, right? They call documentation team, right? Even in my teams, when I was shared resource, sometimes when I was in 3 Scrum teams, obviously I wasn't able to deliver everything on time. And the excuse was always like, yeah, we don't have documentation, right? I'm not gonna point a finger, but we have the technical writer, but he didn't deliver, so that's his problem and his team, they should solve it. And yeah, whenever there's something new, let's not take care about documentation. Let's just go to documentation team. But now they don't have this phrase anywhere. Maybe we have this Q team, we have the Wookie team, but they defined clearly what their scope is. We're doing documentation tool, Q team is doing mentoring and reviews, but you need to write content on your own. So what they now say, and they really say it, we can't release. Documentation is a part of definition of done. So we really quickly have to block the release because we forgot about documentation. It's going to take us like 1-2 days to deliver. So let's block the release. Or let's go to the Q team and ask them for review. We have something new. We introduced some communication model between microservices. We're broadcasting events. How to fit it? You define some structure, you gave us templates, but whatever we want to document next, it doesn't fit. So we should kind of get an agreement how to fit it into this new portal, how to display it, how to write it. So let's go on to the community of practice meeting. And that's the one that it blew my mind. at one day. So when I was working as a technical writer, I was always focused on the core functionalities. So I was working with really technical product owners who really didn't care about content. And then when I became a product owner, and for this tool where we displayed content and everything, I remember one day when I was sitting next to my monitor doing something, and somebody approached me saying like, hey, I don't like how my documentation is displayed in the portal. And I was like, looking, what? I was like, what, PB? What do you have to do with how the documentation is displayed in the UI? And he was like, okay, so now we have this new structure, right? My developers write content, so I have less story points during the sprint to do features. So if I'm spending 2-3 days of my developers to write content, why don't you expect me that I will be picky and I will say, okay, I'm spending 3 days, but then this content is not really cool. I want it to be displayed in more interactive way or in more fancy way. And then he's like sitting with me, showing me different pages of different developers portal, and he's showing like, this is the cool stuff. This is how we should do it. And he's like bringing ideas and everything. And I was like, what? You never cared about content. And he's like, I care now. What you want? So that's all about organizational change. Obviously, it's not a saint grail. Not everybody liked it. Some writers just decided that it's not their world. They just moved to different departments. One guy even moved to marketing, which is like he's now folding pens or something. But he's getting much more money than writer anyway, so that's probably why he went there. Also, by the way, he's a good friend of mine, so he's a really cool guy, but that's what he decided to do. And the technical change. I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's kind of complicated at first. So later on you can ask me more questions, but just in short, how we solved all those challenges. First of all, we made sure that all the content is stored in Git repos together with the code. So if you recall the repo of the developer and the usual folder with source src, then we set it up a rule, okay, and then you're going to have additional folder called docu, where you're going to keep your documentation. Together with documentation, we also decided to keep release notes. So when you deploy a new version of the service, you want to immediately not only to have documentation released, but also the release notes. Because we keep content with the source code, so you can imagine 160 services, it means like 160 different repositories. So we kind of invented a simple set of JSON files with the registry. So we kind of keep a list of all these repos saying like this repo keeps documentation for documentation service, for document service. And this repo keeps documentation for media service. Then we knew that content has to be somehow displayed at the end. So we took a look on static site generators. Who've heard this term before, static site generators? Not many. Jekyll, maybe? So that's I think you can kind of compare it if you try to data open toolkit. So at the end, you write something in XML according to data, you have to have some toolkit that will take it and display in some kind of format. So that's how you can talk about static site generators. So they're just getting some input. In this case, we choose Markdown, and then you can define whatever output you want. And continuous integration. So because it was most of those tools are command line tools, so obviously we could integrate them in our continuous integration tools, give tooling to teams so they can generate only their content or the whole content, however they want. And just in action later on, you can quickly check it. So because static site generators is like totally into open source. There are like 400 different static site generators, and they're all open sourced. So we decided that if we're making such a huge change in the way we're working, basing on open source, we said like, let's do something for the open source as well. So later on, if you're interested with the technical aspect, you can just go to this GitHub link where we have our open source template based on static site generator. It supports this approach that you keep your content in distributed Git environment, so you can try it out how it works. And some references. Later on, you can take a look on Dev Portal or Knowledge, the portals with documentation that we've built with this organization that we have, with the tools that we use, so you can see how much content is already there. It's not of the best quality, I guess. There's no portal with 100% awesome documents there, but you can at least see how much content we have, and we're handling it really well. You can take a look on this presentation. It's publicly available if you want to show it in your companies, to show them that we're actually making changes, even in big corporations. So you can imagine I'm working in SAP, which is like huge corporation, but even in SAP, we're able to make this tiny change in organization. You can go to GitHub, where I'm putting some of my projects, most of them around the static site generators. You can find me on Twitter, and I'm always saying, giving credits to DocPad. So DocPad is the static site generator that we're using. It's on Node.js and JavaScript, so if you're super geeky, you should play with it. And Reveal.js is always what I'm using for presentations, and it's open sourced, so I encourage you to also use it. And I think it was shown yesterday during the workshop. I encourage you to use it. That's all, thanks.
Thank you, Łukasz. Okay, how about some questions? Oh, got them. Okay. Hands up one more time. Okay, we've got someone.
Thank you. So you're saying that in 5 years' time, let's say, traditional tech writers will lose their jobs, right?
No. We actually noticed that it's not on the API, right? So you're writing an API, but over the API documentation, you have to have more, much better description of architecture, more also business documentation written for it. And developers won't do it. So no. It's just, most of the content can be just written by developers. But we won't lose job, but that's not the case. It's not possible.
I see, but you're definitely recommending tech writers to move towards the development side, so to say, if they want to be safer in terms of employment and stuff like that.
I would do it not because of about employment, but I mean, I went this direction and I really enjoy it. I tried writing for some time, and then I played with developing some of the stuff for our solution I wrote, and it was awesome. Like, it's like writing documentation, actually. So I remember when I was releasing my first documents, and I was so excited. And it's the same with the code. When I wrote my first functions and modules, I was like, wow, I did it really. But yeah, you should for sure give it a try. If not, become a developer. You remember this talk from Natalia? You can just help yourself with your current tasks by just writing some scripts or some simple programs. So yeah, definitely you should try.
I think there's a misunderstanding. We don't want to fire any technical writer because of the automation processes. I think the technical writers have a lot of knowledge base and know how to write the documentation, and they should teach the developers how they should do, basically. And as you said, the business documentation is also difficult, too difficult for a simple developer. Mm-hmm. I know what I'm talking about. And my question will be how you handle that kind of situation when in a microservice environment you've got plenty of applications that supports the same business feature. Where you are documented and how you do it.
But you mean like several different APIs doing the same? Or
In a microservices, we've got a lot of applications on the cloud, for example, and much of them spoke with each other to achieve some business feature, business goal, and where the documentation should be stored in that case.
So if understood correctly, then so we have obviously one place where we have all the APIs, but with one API you can't do much. So I think that's what you're saying. And so we're just having in the same portal separate section where we describe one solution that is consisting like of 20 or 30 microservices, and we're describing there what it's for from the technical point of view. And we decided to build a separate knowledge hub where we're putting more business kind of documentation that describes from the business point of view, from use cases point of view, what you can achieve with this set of microservices.
And once more, so you point to the developers. So I've got a lot of questions for you, but maybe later. One more thing: do your Scrum team are focused on the one product at the same time, or more or less? How you work?
So it all depends. So there's, but usually we're trying, at least in my environment, we're in a platform part. So there's a team that is doing totally different microservices with totally different functionalities, but then we advertise them as a persistence, for example, microservices or APIs, right? So, but it's different. So sometimes there's a team focused only on commerce and they're doing only commerce services. So we have rather a division by these buzzwords like commerce or profiling or whatever. But so you don't want to have a team that is focused on commerce and platform as well, yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, we have two more here.
Dynatrace is a company I work for. We create software for monitoring health of microservices, and it's a remark that for the decision at the development level was made to bring developers closer to the culture of microservices, required to use the same approach when writing software for monitoring distributed services, microservices, and documentation for that product is created in exactly the same way. It's Markdown, then static site generated with Jekyll, stored in Markdown together with source code. And also, it's there's exactly the same as in your case. There's no strict division between tech writers and developers. Everyone's responsible for content. Tech writers, they have this role of as I mentioned at my presentation, the curators. They have the final word, and also they're better at information architecture. So really, no worries.
Yeah,
just dive into it.
And like I said, we have this Q team. So they are mentoring. They're doing webinars with developers, and they're using their skills, and their skills are super important. So obviously, it's not about losing job at all. It just sounds like scary at the beginning, and at the end, you can move to marketing like my friend.
I just, before the next question, I don't know, Łukasz, if you remember that, but when you asked about, do you guys know about static site generators? You delivered a talk about static site generators at SOAP 2015 to our audience, and definitely some of you must remember that, although you might not have seen the slides well because the projector wasn't working well, but yeah. Okay, we have one more question, right?
But I was hating Dita at that time, so it's not worth it. I'm cool with Dita now. I really am.
thank you for the speech. It's something we can relate to. I can personally relate to. I'd like to share my experience of organizational change. We previously worked by a waterfall, and we had the docu team located in the other country, in the other office, and we had a huge number of bugs. Then defects, yeah.
Defects.
And then we got a change, an organizational change, when we got writers designed to be part of Scrum teams. But at the moment, I am a part of 3 Scrum teams at a time, but it works well. And we started communicating with the developers and the QAs and the artists and the staff. And we got the number of bugs decreased by 4 times after several months. And we actually made a huge step forward because even when we became the part of the Scrum team, the developers are not always aware of what we were doing actually, what part of information we were creating for the game and what part they were supposed to do themselves. And we made a course of learning who the technical writers are. And after this course, the number of bugs decreased again twice.
Nice.
It was really nice. So really, it is possible.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. That was the last question, and we're about to head for the break. Before that, Łukasz, thank you a lot.